Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Deidre Le Fevre and Kaye Twyford on adaptive expertise and professional learning. If you have any questions for the presenters, please send them through the Zoom chat function when you think of them. Please send them when you think of them. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the meeting, but please send them through the chat function. Upcoming webinars, November 11th, Breaking Down the Wall, Essential Shifts for English Learner Success. November 18th, Jumpstart Student Reasoning and Number Sense in Elementary Grades and Beyond. And December 9th, Clarity, What Matters Most in Learning, Teaching, and Leading. Now what I'd like to do is turn the presentation over to Dan Albert, publisher and the editor for Deidre and Kaye's titles with Corwin, and Dan will introduce today's presenter.
Thank you, Jeff, and it's my honor to introduce the speakers. Dr. Deidre Le Fevre is a senior lecturer and head of graduate programs in educational leadership at the University of Auckland. She began her career as an elementary school teacher in New Zealand and the United Kingdom before completing her PhD at the University of Michigan and moving into research and teaching at Washington State University. She has led large-scale research projects investigating effective leadership and professional learning practices for educational change and improvement. Her research publications focus on practices that support leaders and facilitators, improve their interpersonal effectiveness, and solve complex problems. She brings knowledge and skills in understanding organizational change, the development of professional capability, and effective leadership to her work consulting with leaders and organizations. Also presenting with Deidre is Dr. Kaye Twyford, an experienced school leader and teacher and more recently researcher. Kaye is a lecturer at the University of Auckland. She also works as a consultant supporting communities of learning to build collaborative practice to raise student outcomes. Kaye completed her PhD in education in 2016, investigating teachers' engagement in professional learning through a risk lens focused on uncertainty and vulnerability. Her work identifies the importance of reframing teacher resistance as perceptions of risk and highlights implications for mitigating risks and change. She brings knowledge and skills in project management, leading change, and collaborative inquiry. It's my pleasure to present Deidre and Kaye.
Thank you for that introduction, Jeffrey and Dan, and welcome. This is Deidre here. Thanks for participating in the webinar today. We imagine you're from a range of locations around the globe out there. It's 12:30 here in Auckland, New Zealand. It's Tuesday and it's a beautiful summer day. You're probably on a different day, a different time, and even a different season where you are. Kaye and I have been looking forward to this seminar.
Hi, I'm Kaye. Welcome, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. We're looking forward to sharing our ideas about adaptive expertise with you.
Albert Einstein, so the story goes, was handing out exam papers when one of his students challenged him. "But these are the same questions as last year," the student exclaimed. "Yes," replied Einstein, "they are the same questions, but the answers will be different this year." Whether or not this story is accurate, we can't be sure. However, the idea is important, particularly for our work here today. It can seem that the same questions persist in education. Questions such as, how can we support teachers who are struggling to improve? And how can we make what we do in professional learning more effective? These questions might persist, but the ways we need to respond to them are complex and changing. Outcomes we hope to achieve in this webinar with you today are that you'll develop an understanding about adaptive expertise. You'll learn about the key dispositions that underpin adaptive expertise and how these apply to you. And we'll identify some deliberate acts of facilitation that you can use in your own leadership and facilitation work.
We've structured the webinar today into 5 sections. We hope that works for you. We'll explain things as we go along, and we'll use this slide each time to signal where we're up to and what's coming next. We'll also leave time for questions at the end. This section starts with the why and the what of adaptive expertise.
So why are we focusing on adaptive expertise? Because facilitators, teachers, and leaders of professional learning have been consistently saying that leading and facilitating successful professional learning is really extremely challenging work, and that expectations of the way they will work often don't make sense. The facilitators are saying things like, it's removing the idea that there's an easy solution or there's a guru.
Things only happen when I'm in the school.
I don't want to open a can of worms.
They seem on board, but don't make the changes.
It's competing demands. Other stuff gets in the way.
But where do I start?
Not everyone wants to or needs to do this initiative.
I don't want to offend people.
There's so many things contributing to the issues. The views you just heard come from real people involved in actual professional learning. They're from the participants in the research we've undertaken here in New Zealand over a 5-year period, studying professional learning. As well as Kaye and I, you'll be hearing from Helen Timperley and Fiona L., who are our research colleagues and co-authors. Helen and Fiona aren't available today, so we asked them to make videos. Here, Helen talks about the challenges of professional learning and why professional learning often doesn't work.
I want to talk about why traditional professional development for teachers doesn't usually work. The research is very strong that traditional professional development, where teachers attend a course or even have a speaker in the school, it is very difficult for teachers to translate that information into their classrooms, even when they really want to. It's called the problem of enactment. Taking an idea and then working out, well, how do I do this in my classroom with my students? Courses are usually too far removed from the teacher's work environment, where the same students that they faced before the course, the same school conditions, the same timetables, makes it very, very difficult for them to implement what they've learned. The other problem, of course, is that professional development of this kind can't be differentiated for teachers in terms of their existing knowledge and skills. We ask teachers to differentiate the learning for students in their classrooms, but we don't usually do this for teachers. And it's usually over too short a time for teachers really to understand deeply what the ideas are. They need time to think about the ideas outside of their classroom context and then try it out in their classroom context, and through an iterative process go back to talk with their colleagues, talk with someone with expertise. How do we make this work in our context? What have I learned? Teaching is a practice, and you learn through practice. So it is really important that they be given the opportunities to practice, to go back and find out what works, what didn't work, consider why, and go back and try it out over a number of cycles of learning and trying it out.
Helen's shared some challenges about professional learning. We're also interested in finding out the challenges you may face in leading and facilitating professional learning. We'd like you to take this quick poll to see what you think is the most challenging in your context. And then we'll look for some agreement to see on the top 3. Thank you, Jeff. We'll give you about half a minute to get your results up there. Okay, there's some interesting things there, and it seems like the clear winner or the clear challenge is around dealing with the diverse beliefs and unspoken assumptions. And that's a lot to do with the interpersonal. And I think you'll enjoy learning about perceptions of risk later on in the webinar. So thank you very much for taking that. And then it's interesting that only a few of you commented on not on the list, which is, again, an interesting, I think, international kind of spread for what challenges we all see.
So having looked at those challenges, we're now going to think about adaptive expertise and how that can help us meet those challenges. The concept of adaptive expertise was first proposed by Hatano Inagaki, and it's a helpful concept in education as existing problems continue to exist without being solved and new problems continually emerge. Adaptive expertise is a way of conceptualising what teacher professionalism looks like when people are able to respond in new and effective ways to complex problems, rather than reverting to the familiar and routine ways of responding that are often ineffective. The idea that adaptive expertise matters has gained traction in recent years, but what remains less well understood is how to develop adaptive expertise in practice. So this is what we will focus on in the webinar. We spent a long time working with facilitators of professional learning and school leaders just trying to figure out what adaptive expertise means in an education context. So, yes, this is a complex definition, but a simple one just isn't possible. So I think it's best right now if you just take a minute to read this. We'll be unpacking these ideas further on in the webinar. Right, well, this slide might make you smile. You have to remember we're from New Zealand here. And I'm going to use the analogy of driving a car because this can be helpful when thinking about adaptive expertise. There are many tasks involved in driving that you learn to do almost automatically without thinking about them when you're an experienced driver. In this way, you draw on routine expertise. You respond in predictable ways. That is, until the context is unfamiliar or unexpected. Imagine for a moment finding yourself driving down a rural New Zealand road. Some of you may have. You're driving on the left-hand side. There may even be sheep wandering down the road. This is quite likely. Your routine expertise in driving is no longer adequate. Now you need to constantly check your surroundings, evaluate your actions. Everything becomes more deliberate because the context is now unfamiliar and changing. To be safe and effective driver demands both being able to respond automatically with routine expertise in ways that are predictable and familiar, while also being able to respond in new and novel ways to unexpected and complex events. In the poll that you've just completed, We asked you to think about some of the challenges of professional learning. Now we're going to think about the nature of these challenges and how they might effectively be addressed. Heifetz and colleagues talk about complexity by differentiating technical problems from adaptive challenges. Technical problems require routine expertise, the left-hand column, while adaptive or complex challenges require adaptive expertise, the right-hand column. Let's have a look at the difference in addressing technical or routine problems and addressing complex or adaptive problems next. So routine and technical challenges can be solved with new information or a new skill set, whereas adaptive, complex challenges have no predictable known solution. Routine technical challenges are relatively easy to identify, whereas adaptive complex ones usually feel uncomfortable to identify and uneasy to deny or resist. Routine ones have known solutions. Adaptive can't be fixed, but can be navigated through. With routine technical challenges, solutions can be taught. You can look up the answer sometimes. With adaptive complex ones, solutions usually require changes in how we think and act. Solutions require taking action, experimenting to make new discoveries. A recurring mistake in education is thinking that problems are simple and demand routine expertise, when in fact they're complex and demand adaptive expertise. Many problems or challenges we face in education demand aspects of both routine and adaptive expertise, like the driving example. We move in and out of routine and adaptive.
So in this video, Helen emphasises why adaptive expertise is essential for all educators, not just leaders and professional developers, and it's especially a good way to build teacher professionalism.
This book has as a central theme the development of teachers' adaptive expertise. When education systems want to improve outcomes for learners, they typically respond in two different ways. The first way, which has been highly unsuccessful, is to deprofessionalise the teaching force and tighten up what teachers teach and how they teach it. The problem with this is the complexity and unpredictability of teaching and learning. There is no one-to-one relationship between what teachers teach and what students learn, because learners bring to the learning situation a variety of backgrounds, different knowledge and skills, prior knowledge, and ways to learn. The alternative for systems is to respond by developing teachers' adaptive expertise, which results in the professionalisation of the workforce. Adaptive expertise, with its emphasis on teachers developing deep knowledge and skills and becoming responsive to students, and it needs both those aspects, professionalises a workforce that has as its focus, how do we teach these students that are in front of us with their diverse needs in ways that improve outcomes for them. And it acknowledges that there is no one-to-one relationship between what teachers teach and students learn, and focuses on teachers knowing how to respond to those unpredictable students who walk through their doors each day, and equipping the teachers with the skills they need.
Well, that's a very brief introduction to what we mean by adaptive expertise. It's a highly complex concept that through our research with practitioners, we've tried to make the theory applicable for practice. One way to make complex things easier to understand is to use a model or a metaphor. They help us connect complex and abstract concepts to things we understand. They also capture our attention and help us remember things. They help us get it. Just think back to the definition slide. How much do you recall now? Probably not that much. The tree model is helpful because it's designed to be memorable. In this video, Fiona gives us a succinct view of our research and how we went from talking to effective facilitators to the concept of a tree.
So how did we get from the research that we did to a model of a tree? Well, first of all, we began embedded in facilitators' practice. We identified and worked with expert practitioners who were making a real difference in the schools they worked in based on changes in student data. And we talked to them about their practice, but best of all, we went and got transcripts of them working with other people. So we asked them to record their sessions when they were talking with leaders or with teachers about their practice. And we analysed those with them to talk about the moves that they made, the decisions they made, the things that they did with the teachers and said to the teachers. And we looked for themes across these effective facilitators to see if there were things in common that they did. And out of that work emerged a group of things that we came to call deliberate acts of facilitation. They were deliberate, conscious choices by the facilitators designed to move the leaders and teachers in certain directions using adaptive expertise. But once we'd identified that, we decided to have an even deeper look into these deliberate acts of facilitation. Again, we asked a different group of expert facilitators to record their interactions in schools with leaders or teachers, and then we went and interviewed the leaders and the teachers about their experience of these acts of facilitation, and we had an in-depth interview with the facilitators around the transcript of their work. So together we annotated the transcripts as to their choices, decision-making points, what they were doing, why they were doing it, and we had the feedback and input from the school-based people as to what had worked for them and their experience of these acts of facilitation. We took our whole analysis back to the group of facilitators who'd participated, and we spent a day workshopping with them about what we'd found in the data. And as we talked to them, it became clear that there were kind of two sorts of things. There was one set of things which were stances or dispositions, orientations, attitudes, ways in which they did their work, that pervaded all of their choices. They were kind of fundamental, foundational orientations towards what it was to facilitate for adaptive expertise. Then there were a group of things that were more specific actions or a toolbox or a set of choices that they could then choose from using these dispositions. So they would think, right, I'm going to deliberately do one of these things, but that was born of this stance or attitude they were taking towards the whole work. And all of their decision-making was filtered through this idea of responsiveness, contingency and responsiveness, with an improvement orientation. So it was always about what will make things better for learners, and it was always about responding in the moment rather than having a plan that they followed regardless of what happened in interaction with people. So we pondered this and we thought about what a metaphor would be that might encapsulate this idea that there are some basic, nurturing, foundational ideas that through responsiveness result in a range of actions that are effective in helping leaders and teachers work with adaptive expertise to improve outcomes for learners. And that's where we came up with the tree model.
So what are these basic nurturing foundation ideas that through responsiveness result in a range of effective actions using adaptive expertise? The metaphor of a tree helps us understand adaptive expertise and its interdependent parts. The roots, the trunk, the branches and leaves are all an important part of our metaphorical tree, and significantly they're connected to one another. We're now going to give a brief view of each of the roots. The roots represent the stances, approaches and ways of being that feed the tree. They're essential, as without the right stance to inform the deliberate acts of facilitation, or DAFs as you may hear us call them, the outcomes of these outcomes become much less effective. The first route we'll go through is adopting an evaluative inquiry stance. This is pivotal to effective facilitation. We need to engage in genuine inquiry and evidence seeking, as without this we are unable to really inquire into what's happening or to find out others' perspectives. This stance involves challenging and checking our own and others' thinking, and importantly, questioning and challenging the status quo when our practices are maintaining inequitable outcomes. It involves noticing how we usually respond to information that doesn't align with our own thinking. The second way of being involves bringing experience, knowledge, and confidence about the content and processes of your work. It's about being aware of the knowledge we currently have and being prepared to say, I don't know, when there are gaps. While it's essential to value deep conceptual knowledge in ourselves, we need to value the different kinds of knowledge that other people bring. Being agentic is having a strong sense of personal and collective efficacy and an unrelenting commitment to social justice. This is a fundamental way of being if we're going to challenge the status quo and improve outcomes for all our learners. We need to be continually asking ourselves, is this belief strong or does it waver when things get tough? Am I willing to take action against deficit thinking of others, or do I let it slip? Do I believe that we can make enough of a difference? A key aspect of understanding one's cultural positioning as a facilitator or leader is questioning one's own assumptions and working to understand the position, experiences, and views of others. We've selected to unpack this route more fully in the next section, as we believe it is essential for improving equity for our learners. Metacognition is about thinking about our thinking, and this is an important part in changing our actions and responses. Being constantly metacognitive as we work creates an opportunity to understand what is driving us and our feelings, and we can encourage others to be aware of our thinking too. The final way of being, bringing a systematic focus, is essential for improvement. We can make more of a difference when we understand how different layers of the system influence what happens. It can be about helping others see all the moving parts that are involved in making improvement. What happens in the classroom is only one part of the story. It is so important to create coherence across systems, as there are many people involved with different roles, perceptions, commitments, and beliefs.
Now we move up to the trunk. The trunk is core to adaptive expertise. It represents the concept of responsiveness, which is central. Professional learning needs to be responsive to promote equity and transformation. If educators are to support the well-being and learning of all young people, then we need to promote responsiveness in the form of in-the-moment thinking and decision-making. In-the-moment thinking and decision-making that's responsive to the unique needs of the people we're working with and the varying contexts we're working in. The relationships we develop in doing this work are really central to it. We've explored the roots, the ways of being or stance that is core to adaptive expertise. Now we're going to look at the actual practices, what people do to develop adaptive expertise. These practices we refer to as deliberate acts of facilitation, or DAFs. The deliberate acts of facilitation are organised into 3 groups and represented as 3 branches that you can see here. And like the roots, you'll notice that they're interconnected. The first group of deliberate acts focuses on the purpose and focus in professional learning. The second group focuses on developing knowledge and engaging in inquiry. And the third are about promoting effective learning processes. Schools are usually very busy places. They're also fundamentally complex, which can make them really hard to understand. As a consequence, it can be easy for a lot of energy to be spread across multiple projects and for day-to-day crises to provide further distraction. So the 4 deliberate acts on this branch describe ways to help educators to settle on a purpose and keep the main thing the main thing. An explicit, shared and clear purpose for professional learning provides direction and avoids dissipating the limited time and energy available in schools. Ensuring a consistent focus on outcomes for all students, particularly on the success for those who are currently underserved in our education systems, is key. Developing a shared language and understanding can be helpful in building coherence and creating alignment across professional learning throughout a school. Creating commitment and taking action are important in effective professional learning. It involves promoting collaborative accountability to ensure improvement occurs and is sustained. The second group of deliberate acts focuses on knowledge and inquiry. Part of our role as facilitators is to mobilise the knowledge that the people we are working with already hold. Another important aspect of this is to recognise that our worldview is only one of many, and that knowledge and how it is held and shared differs within and across cultures. The 3 deliberate acts on this branch are closely related to the stance or roots of evaluative inquiry in valuing and using deep conceptual knowledge. Deepening knowledge involves creating the desire to learn new knowledge and ways of doing things to solve persistent problems in teaching and learning. Using evidence critically involves developing skills in analysing, interpreting, and using evidence through a critical lens to inform all levels of decision-making. Deep collaborative inquiry involves being genuinely curious about what is going on for learners and how to make a difference to their learning. The third branch of deliberate acts of facilitation represents effective adult learning processes. Working with adults in complex settings on difficult problems is not just about changing behaviour or thinking, it's also about emotion. These deliberate acts of facilitation focus on the theories and beliefs, feelings and values people hold. There are 5 deliberate acts here. Surfacing and engaging theories and beliefs is challenging work, as people are often not aware of the theories and beliefs that drive their action. Navigating perceptions of risk is about being aware of the emotional responses to learning and change, both your own and those of others. We'll look at this one in more detail in a moment. Developing self-regulation enables people to monitor, reflect on, and make adjustments to their cognition and emotional responses, and to their ability to act strategically. All of this work demands that we provide appropriate support and challenge. Teaching has often been criticised as being dominated by a culture of niceness, where people are afraid to challenge and critique ideas. However, challenge is important as long as it's in a supportive environment. Finally, the co-construction of learning focuses on collaboration and shared knowledge building.
So that's a very quick tour of the basic structure of the tree model. We hope the metaphor of a tree will help you recall what we mean by adaptive expertise and just be a constant reminder when you're in your work to think about, is it to do with the roots and dispositions, or is it about actions, or is it about the trunk, which is related to the responsiveness? We're now going to take a look at one of the roots. What you can see here is a page from our new book. On the right is an example of a one-page summary that explains the concepts, in this case, being aware of cultural positioning. So what does being aware of cultural positioning mean, and why is it essential for making a difference for learners? I'm going to start with a story. As a teenager in the early 70s, giving away my age, I spent a year in Northern California as an exchange student. While there were some obvious differences in the schooling, such as the subjects offered, I did psychology and sociology for the first time. There was a cafeteria that wasn't in my New Zealand school, and the obvious one, there was no school uniform. But there were some not so visible cultural differences too. For example, girls' sport back then at my US school was treated less prestigiously than the boys. The girls' gym was tiny by comparison to the one the boys used. Back in New Zealand, I had shared the same gymnasium with the boys, something I had accepted unknowingly as the norm, until becoming aware that this wasn't everyone's experience. I also spent a week in a high school in Oakland where everything was different, and I was no longer in the ethnic majority. Again, this interrupted my thinking, things I had just accepted, and made me aware that one's experiences depend on who you are and the context you're currently in. These experiences, after all these years, still remind me of the importance of being aware of one's cultural positioning. So in our schools, it's important to be aware of whose lens we are looking through, as this determines how we think and how we act, even if we don't realise it. We need to be consciously aware of our own cultural lenses and how that lens biases our thinking, how it impacts on others, and can contribute to the current problems of practice. This means we need to question our assumptions, take careful note of what we're seeing, and seek to understand rather than judge from our own lens or perspective. Openly critiquing our own lens allows us to be more open to change as well. We can't see other cultures if we don't see our own first, and this route must become a deliberate way of being. Otherwise, we'll not be able to make enough improvement to shift the status quo. So how do we become aware of our cultural positioning? We can seek out others' points of view. We can co-construct commitment to improvement for all, irrespective of who and where our learners come from. We need to support teachers to do this too, knowing it will be difficult and much easier for us all to revert to our deep-seated ways of thinking that maintain our usual ways of responding. Taking a strengths-based approach means being open to others' ideas, especially when there are cultural differences. The language and the culture of the learner is paramount, and as educators, we need to acknowledge that we don't know enough and we are no longer the expert. There's some key challenges in being aware of cultural positioning. It's Being open and vulnerable about it can be uncomfortable and fraught with perceptions of risk. In our research, the facilitators found it difficult to challenge educators from different cultures, even when the educators' actions maintained low expectation for learners, perpetuating inequality. I wonder if that's happening in your settings. We all hold cultural biases, and mostly we're unaware of them. Being aware of our own cultural positioning shifts the unconscious to the conscious, ensuring we better understand the lens we're looking through, making us more open to change. So that's the root, being aware of cultural positioning, and now we move on to what an action is around navigating perceptions of risk.
As we've already seen, there are 12 deliberate acts of facilitation that are the practices of effective leaders in professional learning. Today we're going to focus on just one, navigating perceptions of risk. This is part of the branch of deliberate acts, which really focuses on the fact that emotion is an important and often ignored part of learning and change. Navigating perceptions of risk is something that effective leaders do, but what does it mean? Often when professional learning and improvement initiatives are planned, there's attention paid to what people will learn and why they will learn, but minimal attention is paid to how people might feel about the change or their learning. This is a problem because learning and change involves emotion and very often perceptions of risk. People may feel, for example, a lack of confidence in their potential to change, unsure about what the impact of a proposed change might have on their students, or worry that they don't have the time and resources to bring about the desired change. Our research repeatedly shows that teachers, professional developers, and leaders all perceive risk when they're engaged in professional learning and change. A perception of risk is one's perception that there is something they may lose. It's a person's judgment that the possibility of losing something of value to them. It's a sense of vulnerability. And this is often prompted by feelings of uncertainty. Perceptions of risk are personal. They are different for different people depending on their knowledge, skills, and perceptions. What's perceived to be a risk for one person mightn't be perceived as a risk for another, even though they're in the same place or time. For example, I remember the first day of winter when I lived in Michigan. Young children often perceive the first day of snow to be exciting. They're keen to go outside and play. On the other hand, the elderly often perceive the first day of snow as a risk. The ground is covered with slippery ice. They might worry about becoming isolated and alone at home. They may be afraid to go out for fear of slipping and falling. For the elderly, there may be a perception of risk when the snow arrives. For the young, there usually is not. It's the same with professional learning. For some teachers, a change in teaching practice can be perceived as exciting, while others might have a high perception of risk. They may feel vulnerable. They may feel a perception that they won't be regarded as competent, that they might fail, or a perception that the new initiative may be overly demanding on their time, or that they might lose their sense of autonomy. Understanding that people will have perceptions of risk, acknowledging these, and working to reduce them is an important act of facilitation. Interestingly, perceptions of risk and the associated anxiety or fear are often difficult to see in others. People might try to hide their emotional response or react in a way that looks on the outside to be resistance when, in fact, they have a high perception of risk. Navigating perceptions of risk for ourselves and others is an important practice in leading effective professional learning. So, how do we do this? Well, talking about risk and recognising that it's normal to have a perception of risk during times of change is helpful. Providing a learning culture for teachers and leaders that supports risk-taking where mistakes aren't penalised, but instead seen as part of the process of learning is important. Key challenges for us might be One of the things to remember is that as leaders and facilitators, we have our own perceptions of risk. Will we be good enough? Will they have us back? Do we know enough? Noticing the organisational culture and seeking to create support for risk-taking is also important. We've just provided an introduction to the big ideas here. The intention is really just to get you intrigued and keen to continue your learning. Today, we've mostly focused on developing adaptive expertise yourself as a facilitator or leader. A further key aspect of effective professional learning is your role in developing adaptive expertise in others. These same principles we've presented today apply to developing adaptive expertise in yourself and developing adaptive expertise in others, and are essential if we are to get beyond small pockets of improvement in our skills. Developing adaptive expertise in others enables the professionalism of teaching to be promoted. It means teachers are supported as being reflective, critical, informed, and engaged learners who can respond effectively in the moment to the complex and demanding problems of our times.
Adaptive expertise is a way of responding to the complexity inherent in leading professional learning. We've explained it through the model of a tree, and that's the subject of our new book. The book has a unique organisation, allowing you to read from start to finish or dip into ideas and concepts as required. It's a practical focus with a strong research base, written in a way that encourages you to try new ways of working, to check on what you're doing, and to give you confidence to try to develop the ideas in those you work with. The book's strength is in this flexibility. Each of the 19 elements of the model are unpacked first as one-page summaries. Then we've provided a full explanation of the concept, as we've tried to do through being aware of cultural positioning and navigating perceptions of risk. After the full explanation, we suggest some additional readings if you want to find out more from researchers around the globe. And then there's 2 short vignettes showing what the element might look like in practice. Professional learning is challenging work. The tree is a metaphor of adaptive expertise, will hopefully guide you to use your existing knowledge and skills in new and exciting ways. Thank you. So over to you, Jeff and Dan, for questions.
Terrific, thank you. I have 2 questions that have come in. And everyone out there, if you have a question, please type it in the chat function. We'll get to it right away. You've done a great job of capturing the underlying of facilitation. How does a fledgling facilitator begin to cultivate the capacities that form the roots of the tree?
That's an excellent question. And we don't actually see it any differently for a fledgling, to use the wording of your question, for a new person, for someone who is beginning this work, to somebody who is experienced. We believe that the underlying ways of being are the same. And the interesting thing is that these underlying ways of being, many of us have in other aspects of our lives. So it's about cultivating them in the area of education, where there's often been a different way of working, a recipe, a set of ideas, an initiative, a program to follow. So it's going back to trusting those ways of being, the importance of relationships and inquiry.
And also I think having the roots and the ways of being written down, it gives you something to reflect on and think about. So you can do some critical self-reflection of, do I do this? And I think on the one pages provide some very useful hints about what should I notice? What should I look for? What will the challenges be? And, I think when we were working with our group of facilitators, the group was being joined by new facilitators, and they were very keen to use these concepts as professional learning for new facilitators. And the new facilitators were really excited because they now had something they could get their head around in terms of how to facilitate and what were important things. So hopefully that answers the question for the listener.
Terrific, thanks. I have another question. It takes focus and hard work to be agentic and to practice metacognition. Do you have activities in your book that we can use to help practice in those areas and to strengthen our work in those areas?
We do. We have examples of practice by describing what other facilitators are doing. So we call them vignettes. So we actually have descriptions of practice with an analysis down the left-hand side that links to adaptive expertise. We also, on the one pages, specifically have, how do I do it? What should I notice? What might the key challenges for me be? And under these we have bullet points of the key things that we noticed in the research. And then these are unpacked with examples and description in the rest of the chapters of the book.
Thank you. I have one last question. What is the best way to get a majority of faculty on board with adaptive expertise in professional learning?
That's a very good question, and maybe the subject of a new book. I think getting people on board is about talking about what you're doing and what it is, and getting the metacognition going about how what we're doing might not be making enough of a difference. And I think it's bringing that moral purpose to the group. But also, I think a strength of what we've done is, through working with the effective facilitators and leaders, is actually providing, like I said before, some explicit ways of working. And I think sometimes people don't get on board because they might think they can't do it or it seems hard. And, I think this comes a long way to providing support.
And as Kaye said, they might think it's too hard and they can't do it. And linked to that is a perception of risk. So actually, if you start in a staff room with people and they appear to not be engaged, sometimes just by acknowledging that this is new, it involves change, there may be things that you don't like, you may have feelings about this, and that's normal, this isn't just about you, can be a really powerful way to start, because it gives people the opportunity to open up and be honest, even if just in small groups or with one other newbie or one other fledgling. Yes, I like that word.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the questions. I'd like to turn over the meeting to Sharon Pendergast from Corwin, who's going to talk a little bit about some marketing issues.
Thank you, Deidre and Kaye. It was a fascinating subject matter and a very enjoyable, thought-provoking way to spend the last 55 minutes. So thank you very much for bringing this content to us. And if you're as fascinated as I was about the subject and you would like to learn more about the subject, I'd like to extend to you an offer to save 20% on their newly published book, Leading Powerful Professional Learning. Please use the code WEBINARS in all caps at www.corwin.com to take advantage of this special offer. I thank you for attending today. I especially thank our presenters, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. this concludes our programming.